Hi, everyone. We are going to get started in a minute. We'll just be waiting to let other people have the chance to log in here. While we're waiting, feel free to use the chat box to say hello and tell us who you are and what firm you're coming to us from today. All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. This is Lauren Oglesby. I am the coordinator of content communication and programs here at AIA New Orleans. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our town hall on the Vieux Carre Commission. We are joined today by our moderator, Chris Johnson, who's coming to us from the AIA Advocacy Committee, and then our two guests, Bryan Block and Dr. Renee Burgoyne from the Vieux Carre Commission. Heads up about the format up top here. All attendees are muted, but you will be able to ask questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window or through the chat function. So be sure to type in your questions there and we will address them as we go along. We will be making a recording of this webinar available afterwards on our YouTube. The recording will exist purely as a resource, so you will only be able to obtain a CEU credit if you are here with us live today. And then lastly, we are a small team and we don't have the capacity to handle any IT issues for our attendees. So as a backup, if you run into any technical issues, you can always try the call-in number that was sent to your email earlier this morning. All right, so today we are going to be taking part in a discussion ably led by our moderator, Chris Johnson. For over 20 years, Chris has provided architectural services for a diversity of projects ranging from single and multifamily residences, libraries, retail stores, offices, restaurants, transportation, schools, and even a rum distillery. As a firm, Christopher E. Johnson Architect strives to incorporate sustainable design into each project and has joined the AIA 2030 commitment. Additionally, Chris has served on the AIA New Orleans Advocacy Committee since 2015. In this capacity, he has had the privilege of fostering relationships between the local community of architects and various public agencies, including the Louisiana Office of State Fire Marshal and multiple departments within the city of New Orleans. And our first panelist, Bryan Block. After having grown up on the Northshore, Bryan Block received his Bachelor of Architecture degree from LSU in 1987. He began his practice of architecture in Durham, North Carolina, working on the Gothic revival buildings of Duke University. He returned to New Orleans in 1996 and worked as an independent architect, restoring and renovating local high-style historic residential buildings, two of which he had designated as local historic landmarks. Block received his Master of Preservation Studies from Tulane University in 2011, after which he joined the Historic District Landmarks Commissioner as a buildings plan examiner and then preservation architect. He became the director of the Vieux Carre Commission in 2016. In late 2020, he was named as executive director of the Historic Districts Landmark Commission, as well as part of a broader restructuring of the new Office of Business and External Services with the City of New Orleans. Thank you for being with us, Bryan. And then our second panelist today is Dr. Renee Burgoyne. Originally from Lafayette, Louisiana, Renee Burgoyne moved to New Orleans in the late 1990s. She received a BA from Loyola in history in 2001, followed in 2004 by an MA in history from the University of New Orleans. After working as the curator of education for the Herman Greenman Gallery Historic Houses, she decided to attend Tulane University, where she obtained a master's in preservation studies. In 2011, she started work on her PhD in urban studies, urban planning at the University of New Orleans. While there, she received an MS in Urban Studies and finally a PhD in Urban Studies Urban Planning in 2014. Currently, she is the Senior Architectural Historian for the VCC, but will take over as Deputy Director in 2021. Renee has been with the VCC since June 2015. Thank you both so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody, or afternoon now, and thanks for taking some time out of your day for all of our attendees and graciously spending time with us from the city, and all the time you've placed looking at some of our questions in advance of this. I'm very glad to sit and ask questions that we've already received from our attendees in advance, but just so everybody knows, at the end, we'll open Q&A. So if you have questions, send them in the chat, send them in the Q&A box, and we'll try to tackle those with the time we have remaining at the end of the presentation. So to get started, it sounds like there have been some great and hopefully future-looking improvements that have happened to the city and staffing recently. And congratulations to both of you for your elevations or recent promotions in the ranks here. So I'm very glad to have the depth of experience that you've been able to bring to us from not only your Vieux Carre experience, but also your breadth of experience throughout the city. To touch on the changes that have happened to the city to start with, right now it sounds like there have been some modifications to your position, Bryan, as Executive Director of Vieux Carre and also HDLC as part of the Office of Business and External Services. This is a changing of the departmental structure. Mm-hmm. We're not familiar with it from the architectural side, from the local community of architects, but we'd love to hear more about your understanding of what that entails at the city level and where you see the future changes in these departments.
Sure, thanks, Chris. Yeah, actually, it's pretty exciting. There's a whole revolution that's going on right now on what was the 7th floor. I know that all of you are familiar with the one-stop shop, which we did find, over the past 5 or so years, did go a long way to solving problems of this sort of the silo effect of all the various departments that were not there wasn't enough interworking amongst them. And yet we still were finding that there were a lot of roadblocks in the day-to-day operations as architects and applicants working your way through the city system. So this Office of Business and External Services is going to be the overarching umbrella under which what was once referred to as safety and permits, HDLC, Vieux Carre Commission, City Planning Commission, but also bringing in various elements of economic development, the workforce development. These are, all of us are economic engines for the city. And so this new paradigm is bringing everyone to the table. And as such, the new deputy director, Peter Bowen, who is working with land use and economic development, is finding various ways of cross-culturation, if you will, various aspects of our various jurisdictions that are perceived or are actually in reality somewhat redundant. And so, for example, right now, they have decided to elevate me into the position of director of both departments, HDLC and VCC, with Renee elevating to deputy director of the VCC. Eleanor Burke will still be the deputy director of the HDLC. And underneath this new org structure, we can find cross-culturation and more efficient operations. Our inspector staff is also going to be working under the umbrella of what has historically been known as safety and permits. And the idea here is that an inspector should be able to inspect most or all aspects of a project. For example, if you schedule a final inspection. Historically, you would get the HDLC or VCC inspector to come out and inspect our aspects of our jurisdiction and sign off on that, and then you might wait for the mechanical inspector or the building inspector to come out and do their inspections. And so this would sometimes lead for an unfortunate amount of time. And the hope here is that the one inspector can come out and do all of them, and that way you're moving into a CO infinitely more efficiently. And that's just one example of ways that we're going to be working towards decreasing these kinds of redundancies. So it's very exciting. It was an opportunity for me to further just introduce this concept to the architecture community. So if you'll just bear with me, I wanted to read some talking points that are just the OBES is working with. OBES has been tasked with executing the mayor's vision of transforming New Orleans from being the city of no into the city of yes. OBES has merged the city's land use departments and the offices of economic and workforce development under one roof. Through the consolidation and alignment, the land use and entitlement departments are the engine that power community and economic development in our neighborhoods and our city. Equitable economic and community development is the North Star for OBES. Everything we do is oriented towards this vision and prioritized through a lens of equity, and we strive to lower barriers to accessing opportunity both in City Hall and throughout the community. The next 24 months will determine the next 2 decades of our city's future, and OBES is committed to not missing this opportunity. We believe this is a crucial opportunity to unmake decades of progress or slingshot our city 50 years into the future.
Sounds very eye-opening, and it sounds like an aspirational goal with slingshotting to the future like that. The starting point might be, like you say, consolidate your inspections to try to speed up your certificate of completion. Is there anything else on the radar that might be taking the slingshot approach and saying this is outside of the box?
I think, the recognition that our respective staff members are engines of economic development, and trying to put an actual figure on what does the work of a plans examiner or a building inspector, what is the economic impact of an efficient plan review and shepherding a project through to completion. And by monetizing that or being able to understand it from that lens is helping to guide this trajectory forward. This is not just a mid-level employee that sits behind a desk or a computer and reviews plans, permit, check. There is actual economic impact on how efficient that work is. What is the relationship of each of these associates with our constituent public? And so we're trying to be that granular with the way we're approaching this.
You mentioned in our offline conversation that might further your description here, that you were looking to have a working development group with your interagencies for maybe complex projects, larger projects, a threshold that may not yet have been determined. Can you tell me about that concept?
Sure. Once a month, the development working group meets, and this is the intention of this is to bring developers to the table with all of the players that they're going to interact with at City Hall from start to finish. I mean, obviously that would be safety and permits, HDLC, VCC, city planning, but also all of the various players in the economic development side, most of which I'm myself becoming more familiar with because we were all still kind of bifurcated before. And so when they come to the table, they present the project, and this can be an apartment complex. It could be an entertainment complex. And there's not a limitation on the size of the group. These tend to be commercial projects, not small scale residential. Although we would definitely welcome anyone who would like to take advantage of this opportunity. And in that way, not only does the applicant become aware of what's going to be expected of them down the road, but it's an opportunity for the various players in these other departments to become aware of projects that are going to be coming down the road, and to meet with them and ask questions of them, ask for different information. So this can keep a project from the very beginning of a project moving more efficiently and quicker through the process. We, in our conversation before this meeting, we do have a project checklist that we can provide to applicants. And Chris, I'm not sure how y'all are disseminating information to the participants. I could have this forwarded to you guys right now. Great, because I can just go ahead and do it right now. Terrific.
Well, let me jump around in that list of questions that we have, so we can kind of keep according to, we'll piggyback on one topic that seems to be relevant. Looking at this as an economic development engine, we have plenty of applicants who are seeking tax credits as part of their ability to make a project feasible. We recognize there are two things, and we can take this, I'll say them first, and you can take them in either order that you see fit. One is that there is a sunset of the state tax credit that is projected for the year, let's see, my notes, 2026. So it's a few years away still, but we recognize that that is something that may be extended or it may not be. The other thing I'd like to ask, well, I guess the question would be, how does that impact, or what are your forecasts on how that may impact development in the French Quarter? And then piggybacking onto that, economic development with the state, sometimes they have different views of what is appropriate for a building than what the Vieux Carre committees may say, during their review process. How do you resolve, or how can architects more efficiently resolve conflicting design requirements by the two agencies?
So you're sending the questions in advance was very, very helpful. I forwarded that question to our contact at SHPO. And let me just read her response, because I think it really kind of gets to the point. This is about the sunset of the tax credits in 2026. She said the answer is simply unknown. This program has always had a sunset date since its inception in 2002, but those various dates have always been extended. We don't forecast impacts regarding specific cultural districts or downtown development districts in general, though we did have a study on the catalytic impacts of the state commercial tax credit program, which used case studies from communities. And then there's a link here to that document, which I can also forward to you.
Please do. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to your other question about the more efficient way for projects that are going to be going through the SHPO review and then also through the VCC or the HDLC review. Also an excellent question. I was discussing this with Eleanor Burke, the Deputy Director of HDLC this morning, and they have developed sort of a protocol when there is a project that is going to be utilizing tax credits. It's best to know that in advance. And the recommendation is that the proposal go to SHPO and be worked through phase 2 in advance of it proceeding to the Architecture Review Committee. And the reason being, SHPO has always been more conservative and more restrictive than the HDLC. And so it used to be, and I can remember when I was at the HDLC several years ago, that there would be this sort of chicken and the egg, thing back and forth, which, was not very efficient or time. It was very time consuming. We feel that it doesn't make sense to come to the Architecture Review Committee until we know what the SHPO requirements are going to be. And then we can work together to, move it in that direction.
And I would say,
Yeah,
Brian,
please.
from the opposite side, from VCC, SHPO almost always defers to us for exterior. So it's a little bit different. We have stricter guidelines in VCC than HDLC does, and we have stricter guidelines in SHPO.
So it'd be apply to Vieux Carre Commission applications first, and then go to the Part 2 process with SHPO. The opposite for HDLC districts, where you go to SHPO first and bring their findings to your ARC meeting.
Correct.
It's a little bit different, yeah. And I will say, I mean, obviously Brian knows this as well, ever since there's no SHPO office in New Orleans anymore, it is a little bit more difficult sometimes, but I know they try to be here once a month and try to make time to go to different sites. I mean, I've been with VCC since 2015, and there's never been some sort of discrepancy where they've almost always deferred to VCC for exterior issues.
It's good to know that they have an understanding of what works most efficiently, not just for your individual offices, but for their paperwork, because they have to bring that to the State Department eventually for their. So I'm sure they have their own conversations internally how best to coordinate with New Orleans, where we just have such a tremendous number of applications each year. So
yeah, absolutely.
To move in that same direction then, and either, this is digging into the histories a little bit. Are there some important preservation issues that are more universal in nature that are affecting the Vieux Carre at this moment, that maybe has changed over time? You're seeing a glut of a certain kind of work, or you're seeing that there's a certain at-risk category of building or a design trend that you are embracing or concerned with the growth?
Now, during the time of COVID, although there has been a very healthy continuity with applications and proposals, it's definitely created a shift in the type of proposal. Right now, I think most of what we're getting is work on retaining the existing condition more than a lot of new construction or aggressive modifications to historic buildings. A year or so ago, we were, when the economy was booming and tourism was on the rise, we got a lot of proposals for adding rooftop additions to existing buildings. And a lot of those included activated exterior spaces. And so some of you may be aware that we were kind of caught off guard, and that new trend wasn't something that had been addressed in our design guidelines. So we put together a committee and drew up guidelines to address, how is this appropriate, under what condition is it not appropriate, and how we could, then better regulate. Because our design guidelines and our entire approach is always to make sure that our review process is transparent, predictable. We wanted to make sure that if a developer is considering a particular property, they would want to know at the outset, would a exterior activated space be something that could be considered? And in certain situations, yes, and in certain situations, no. So we now have that guideline. It's been ratified by council and is part of our design guidelines. And so that's an example of what was happening. Nate, what are you seeing now?
So that's what I was thinking about. We really, I would say, in the last 4 years, stepped up our violation game. We have 2 very talented inspectors on staff that are super smart and really on top of this. And they kind of changed the game for us as far as, things that had really fallen to the wayside for years. And I think a trend that we're going to start to see, on the same note that Brian was saying, 2 years ago, we had such the economic boom, right, with tourists and the roof decks. And now the quarter's a little bit of a ghost town right now, and a lot of businesses aren't going to make it. And a lot of the businesses had triple net leases. So some of the buildings have really fallen into disrepair. So we are getting a lot of applications for things that probably should have happened 10 years ago. But just, you know, in these triple net leases, the tenant doesn't always take care of the building. So now we're seeing some pretty big applications coming in for, I'm thinking particularly on Bourbon Street. You know, some of these businesses are now gone. The building is empty. The landlord comes back, or the landlord comes back in, and building owner comes back in and realizes, hey, this is falling down. No one has taken care of this for 15 years, you know?
Right.
A lot of deferred maintenance that's getting taken care of right now, which is, I'm glad to see that people are taking advantage of this opportunity to clean things up and kind of, you know, this is going to be a temporary situation, and what we're encouraging everybody is to, you know, be ready to go when the economy bounces back.
And I think a lot of people took, particularly early on during the pandemic, a lot of people kept people employed by, you know, doing work on the exterior of the building, or just doing things that they couldn't do when you're open 7 days a week, you know? And, you know, obviously there's going to be a shift in some businesses, but the buildings will be ready to go for the same tenant or new tenants, or, you know, whatever. But we're seeing a lot of that right now, which is interesting. It's an interesting shift.
That's the beauty of the French Quarter is its adaptability. It's been there for all sorts of trends in businesses and residential uses, and it will continue to do that and be still malleable and, you know, responsive to the needs of the people who live and work there.
Absolutely.
Properties. I'm glad to hear that people are stepping up and repairing and helping ultimately to keep our identity as a city looking its best.
And for the architects on this call, you know, a lot of these are big projects that some of them do require not just a contractor, but an architect as well, with drawings. And so it's you know, you're going to work closely with the inspector and the plans examiner, and sometimes it's in phases and it can be a little bit longer, but it's an interesting trend to start seeing.
Now that you're receiving so many applications, we recognize that I'm jumping into another question, that COVID has changed everybody's way of conducting business for monthly meetings, right? Of course, you're meeting remotely still for the ARC and for Vieux Commission. How has your team adapted and is conducting meetings now, and how do you see in the future, let's say still during the pandemic future and then post-pandemic?
I think ultimately, Brian, we would like to keep a call-in option when all of this, you know, whenever that is, when all of this is done. Because I think it allows people that can't necessarily get to City Hall. It allows them, you know, a way to contact remotely.
And also, you know, what part of this too is operating satellite offices once a week in the public libraries. The VCC is going to initiate its own satellite office in the Vieux Commission Foundation offices on Decatur Street, starting first week of the new year. So a part of 1 day a week, people can come into the satellite office, fill out applications, talk with a staff member, potentially get over-the-counter permits without having to go into City Hall. And so right now they're working towards getting another satellite into New Orleans East. So, you know, we're trying to bring the work to the people. And I think that this whole, like Renee said, this whole remote electronic technology that is really going to be a game changer coming out of this, you know, COVID situation. I don't see putting this genie back in the bottle. This is just too convenient. And, you know, I think that this is very exciting. And if we can do this and get more people engaged in what we do, then that's definitely a positive.
I think it has just allowed us to reach more people.
That's a
more
lot of
conveniently.
working. I mean, that alone, the fact that we have never, since this whole thing started, have never slowed down because we just moved all of our equipment, into my dining room. And so we just keep going.
Right.
So,
I think it's also really great for our committee members and our commissioners. Like, if they can do this from home, why drag them down here? The parking,
Mhm.
just the whole minutia of it, if you can do it from home.
It's a tremendous commitment, the time and energy that commissioners make and the architectural review staff or ARC makes to, like you said, park, dedicate hours of their day, and ultimately being able to conduct that same level of expertise by the convenience of this method. I'm glad to see that there's some traction that may make that more of a fixture in the future as well.
unfortunately, I think at the beginning, there was concern that this would lead to, the lack of efficiencies with, our colleagues and getting the work done. But this has been a real opportunity to show that this is the same dedication that people have and the same accountability that we all have to the public and to each other none of that has changed.
I feel, speaking for VCC, more efficient than ever. And we're not running around, I'm here. And we have a great team, and they seamlessly moved home and just kept going. And the amount, normally at this time of the year, around the holidays, we start to slow down a little bit. Obviously last year was a little bit nuts because of cyber attack right before Christmas, but we have not slowed down at all.
Yeah.
Number of applications that are coming in is, I think it's more than we've ever had at this time of year.
So there will be an continued and increased need for efficient use of your time. And
Absolutely.
also for the applicants, that's a benefit to the applicants as well, because you want to get things off of your plate quickly because you have the next month's applications coming right behind it. You're looking for ways to help people move forward. You're reaching out to them with that remote satellite office on Decatur Street. You're reaching out to them digitally. So you're giving multiple ways for connecting. And architects can make use of both of those methods for your office.
And then, right now, as we're still figuring out this transition, I would welcome any feedback that you, professionals have as we progress through this as to what is working, what is not working, what didn't work with the one-stop shop approach that you would like to see improved. Because I think there's a whole element of adaptability baked into this new concept. Nobody is going into this thinking, well, we've got it figured out now, and this is what it's going to look like. So it's a great opportunity for feedback.
Let me follow up on that with one of the questions that we were reviewing ahead of time. What are evidently there's a track record or a common history of applications that come to you for review that incrementally expose the proposed work on a project, where it starts as a little something and then it's a little something more, and the next month it's a little something more, and by the end of so many months it's turned into a wholesale change, which is maybe not an honest approach from the beginning, or it could be accidental. Sometimes as you digging further into a building, you realize, no, we really do need more. But for the people who are disingenuous about the scope of work that's being produced, how is the VCC trying to make a more efficient process for approval, stopping abusive applications, and making the process easier for those who are applying above the table and being as transparent as possible?
That's it. And that's, I think, the one question that you provided that I'm stumped, to be perfectly.
I really think our plans examiners we have two plans examiners that have been with us for so long that they know all the tricks.
Okay.
They really do. And I have seen them get an application and a set of drawings, and they're like, well, this isn't going to be enough, or this, I see what they're trying to do. So then they will email back and they will get in touch with the applicant, and kind of break it down.
Mhm.
But
And one of the, we've got a couple of these that are on the boards right now. One of them, condo projects that one condo owner sends in an application for a mini split system, and then another one does, and then another one does. And so, we're working with our legal department to figure out, how do we require that the end game is provided, and so that we can review something holistically and provide a better end product, instead of this death by 1,000 cuts, as one thing leads to another. Another example of that right now, everyone's probably aware of the proposed 5G infrastructure that's going to be coming citywide.
Right.
And as this kind of modern technology invades the historic districts, we have been able to draft guidelines, and one of the requirements will be that the vendor provide GIS locations of every installation that they're going to propose for the district for review in Globo, instead of like, we'll look at one on one corner, and then 2 days later we get another application for one down the street, and then eventually you've got 500 of them, and we've never been able to examine the full impact that kind of invasion is going to have on a fragile historic district. So this is one that we were fortunately able to see coming down the road. I think it's different than what you're talking about, when an applicant is maybe disingenuous and says this is it, but then and so we're required to review what's before us, but like Renee said, it's in a lot of cases what's coming down the road. And so,
Yeah. Well, you touched on condominium owners too, and you have one condominium owner that submits for a mini split, which is just mechanical, but you recognize that it's visible to the public or to air. And then you have a series of other condos doing the same thing in the same building. One of the questions that came up was, condo owners need to have approval not only from the Vieux Carre to do this work, but they also need to provide evidence that the condo association has approved this work as well. What kinds of evidence do you typically accept from the various condominium homeowners associations to say we approve of this proposed work pending Vieux Carre approval?
It's as simple as requiring that written consent be provided by the homeowners association. We're dealing with this right now, where and I think that we have been adapting to this condition. I think for years we would take a look at the proposal at hand, because we don't get into disputes between condo owners and their homeowners association. That's outside of our purview. But now that, like, going back to the example of the multiple air conditioning units that keep getting proposed, we're able to now go to the homeowners association and say, this proposal is before us, and we need to have written consent before we will consider it.
And it should be noted that, I mean, this varies condo association to condo association, but the majority of condo associations, when you own one condo, you do not own the exterior. The association owns the exterior. So that's where, it gets a little bit trickier.
Yeah, so, we don't want to install a roof mounted condenser rack in front of somebody's dormer, and we may not have that information as part of the proposal. So we have to consider those other condo owners as well, or tenants, not just a condo owner, but this could be anyway. So that's something that we've been working with our legal department to make sure that we're being as rigorous as we can be without getting to, because I always think that it's a terrible remedy to offer somebody to say, well, that's going to be a civil matter for you two to work out. And it's like, if we can avoid this at the beginning, then I think that that's a much better approach.
And honestly, this has really just been something that's popped up on the radar really intensely just recently.
Yeah, technology is changing.
Yes.
So, I think that there's a lot of people that are updating their external equipment. It gets rough when we get into situations where people do things without permits, and then we're kind of coming around the back end. We discover it and we issue a violation. Somebody wants to do a retention. And so then we've got, they did a through wall air conditioning unit in a building on Decatur Street, or excuse me, on Dauphine Street. And we would never have approved you busting a hole through this wall. And so that then they're like, well, then, okay, we're going to take that out and put in a mini split. Well, then that's going to be, affecting the adjacent condo. And so it just becomes this big, so it's the work without permits is always the thing.
Always get your permits.
Always get your permits. And it sounds in this case, if it's a condominium, maybe it becomes a prerequisite that proof of approval of the homeowners association needs to be submitted at the time of the application to help relieve the pressure on Vieux Carre. You don't want to be dictating what the homeowner association has to do. You want to review what they've already approved.
Well, it slows down the process. I mean, if somebody comes, with the application and the HOA approval is included, then, that can move straight into the review process and move things along. So.
And honestly, when submitting, because obviously most of this, you would be submitting a building permit through safety and permits, and then a sub permit would be created for us. It really should be submitted initially when that building permit is put in.
Well, there is and I will say from the architect side, when you look at the one-stop application screen, there's sometimes some confusion about what the triggers are for mechanical work, because some mechanical work doesn't need to have an architectural approval. But as you know, anything that's exterior in the Vieux Carre does need approval. But that's not clearly shown in the one-stop. Repairs, I believe, is shown unique to the Vieux Carre, whereas repairs don't need to be approved necessarily in a standard building permit for a non-historic district.
And those are the kind of things that we may not see from our end.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Chris. That's good. That's really good feedback. And I encourage other people on the call that if you are finding these kinds of omissions or things that are confusing in the application process, to please bring them to our attention. We do know that what you see when you apply is not necessarily something that we may be as familiar with, because we don't go through that process enough.
And Chris, one of the things, and for everyone on this call, that OBES is going to pride itself on is a new digital front door. There's going to be this whole new system that's supposed to be, I know they're still working all this out, but will be much more intuitive and user-friendly than what we've got going on right now.
We're all certainly looking forward to that. Llama has been helpful in some ways and not helpful in other ways. I won't take too much more time because I do want to open it up for Q&A, but just to touch on some AIA business, we have an obligation through the city to offer names for review, for architectural reviews, not just for Vieux Carre, but for HDLC as well. Our commission members process, is there a way that we can improve the process on our end? Do you find that there are ways that we can improve the qualifications of the person? I know we have a good qualified team of people already, but are there ways you see in the future that you would like certain qualifications to be highlighted in the names that are offered for your review?
Sure. I posed that question to Josh Cox, who is the member of the mayor's team who handles boards and commissions, because I do think that that's really vital. And his response really was that applicants or candidates for these important seats on the commission need to approach this without a personal or political agenda, with that their motivation for wanting to be on the commission is to, first of all, preserve the integrity of our historic districts, but also representing obviously the needs and attitudes of the AIA and the architectural profession. We have had a really great group of commissioners representing the AIA. And, I think with few exceptions, they have always kept to that directive. But there have been times when we have had architects on either the HDLC or the VCC that really their own approach to architecture was at odds with the preservation of historic districts and historic buildings. And it isn't to say that there's a sliding scale of what that means. I mean, obviously, I myself as an architect believe that the historic buildings and the districts themselves need to be living, breathing neighborhoods, that we're not a museum district. These buildings need to respond to the modern needs of us as a people. And, that includes mechanical equipment and, in appropriate locations, solar equipment, et cetera. But to have a position that, all historic buildings should have all of their historic windows removed so energy efficient windows can be installed as a motivation, let's just say, would definitely be problematic. So it isn't to say that there is no place in a historic building for energy efficient windows, but it's a broad conversation, and it's like there's a place where that's appropriate and a place where not, perhaps. And that's just an example. So, and I think one of the other things that we're really trying to do is to diversify our representation on our boards and commissions. So, we're wanting it not to be the old white man board. So if we have, more people of color, more women, transgender, whatever, we want for all the members of our community to step up and participate.
I would personally like to thank you guys for Tony DiMaggio, Stephen Bergeron, and Rick Fifield. They are just a crackerjack team. I mean, they've been so great. Yeah, we're very fortunate at VCC.
And I will say thank you also to Stephen for being part of this and introducing this town hall today as we were preparing for it as a very active member of the team building this bridge here.
Yeah, they're great.
Well, that's all the list of questions we received ahead of time, but I'll open it up if we have other questions that came from other people, or if there are some follow-ups that Bryan or Renee, if either of you have something that maybe we should touch on again or reintroduce.
No, I just really want to reiterate what I said a minute ago, that this is a really great opportunity for you to reach out to us as we transform our various land use departments and how we interact with you. If there are things that you would like to discuss, I would be happy to meet in person or have a one-on-one with you and introduce you. I'd love to have the opportunity to introduce you to Peter, and we could, have another like inter-office town hall where we get various players similar to our development working group on a call like this and meet your needs. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, we did have another question here that came up, and this is getting into the same conversation we're talking about maybe with sustainability, with how maybe some buildings are more readily adaptable to current technologies or new windows or other practices. We have a question about stormwater management in the Vieux Carre, because some of those thresholds could be triggered by renovating a large building, 5,000 plus square feet of impervious space. We then have a requirement by legal requirement to provide stormwater management. As you know, that's very tight. The land use is not as flexible in the French Quarter for that. How have you dealt with previous applications, or where would you like to see them going?
For years, this wasn't included in the CZO requirements, and fortunately, that's been changed. And so we are dealing with this in several current applications or ones that we've just been dealing with any number of things from pervious paving requirements to, retention equipment that is beneath a courtyard. So we're not, as a rule, treating the district differently. We obviously have to be more sensitive, perhaps, to how this looks. But that's definitely, a problem. And we're currently working on our second edition of our design guidelines that is going to include a chapter on sustainability and resilience. And so look for that to be included in the guidelines coming forward.
The two options that you just discussed, the pervious paving and the retention below ground, below courtyard, are great when you have access to sky. There are some properties that are property line to property line. There is no ground surface available on that property. Have you seen those applications come through, or have those been mired in
Not
crossing?
to my knowledge. That would be a very interesting question to, I admit I need to be more educated about that. So we should talk to our resilience officer about when what would trigger that sort of requirement.
Well, we're all on this together, so we want to make sure we're trying to do the best thing to preserve the integrity of the corridor in a sensitive way, while looking to the future and recognizing that this also is a way to help the city and not, overflow the utility system. So it's a good idea to, if that becomes a cross interdepartmental conversation, that might be a good one to bring up. Let's see, there's another question that came through. Let's see, collaboration with Safety and Permits Director continue, part 2. How have building trades fared during this pandemic? Skilled craftspeople. Now, this is a good question. Some of the quarter buildings need, let's just say, skilled craftspersons like masons, or the finished carpentry that really needs a certain craftsmanship level of workmanship. Do you find that the contractors who have been providing these services are doing an adequate job, or have you found that there's a shortage of skilled labor to do it correctly?
I'm looking at Renee's face.
Masons are always in high demand, particularly one that is skilled. I just don't think there are enough of them.
Yeah, and it's been really problematic, particularly with brick masonry. In the French Quarter, we have had
a whole bad run
of,
a couple years ago.
Use the word masons, but people that are doing brickwork that, apparently the way you do it now is you smear mortar all over the wall and then you wipe off what you can. And, it's just unbelievable.
We had a really bad run there for a minute.
Yeah, so we were developing a protocol that would be, here's your permit, and you're required to do a test patch before you proceed and have us come and inspect the work. Now, would anybody do that? No. And so it's been really problematic. And I don't want to pick on brickwork, but
it seems to be the number one.
Yeah, but it's a really important question, because there has been a definite, obvious dearth of training in historic techniques and materials. This goes to definitely plaster and stucco work, and just carpentry in general, to the level that we would hope they would arise to, working on these very, very fragile, invaluable buildings. The Vieux Commission Foundation was doing a series of these, what they're calling quarterly care workshops, to where they would have various craftspeople come in and do live presentations of all aspects of building, from shutter work to masonry, etc. And the not just for the public, but for tradespeople to come in and learn from the masters. And then that's unfortunately had to stop while we're in this COVID situation. But they also were raising funds for various apprenticeships, so that craftspeople could go and get accreditation in this work. And so I think that a lot more of that needs to happen. And the foundation has definitely recognized the need. And so we're very open to anybody has any ideas about opportunities.
I have an idea, and it's somewhat in keeping with the city's contracting requirements, but it's definitely not been vetted. I speak only for myself here. There have been in city contracts, you have requirements for DBE hiring, and those persons or companies are already pre-identified as who qualifies as a DBE company. And so when you select one of those companies, the city contracting office can verify that that entity is already approved to do that work. So that would meet the requirements of the contract. Has there been consideration that maybe certain masons or finished carpentry trades could be pre-vetted, so you have a list of providers who has already tested?
Personally, we
asked about that.
Speak for Renee, we both believe that should be required, particularly in the historic districts. And we have, more than once gone to the legal department to discuss this and have continually been told that we don't have the ability to have those kinds of requirements. I personally think there should be, an audition performed before you can work on one of these buildings. But, that may be something that can be pursued legislatively to, we're fortunate that we have a lot of support in city council right now for the work that we do. And that might be something that we could pursue, from that end.
It's also kind of tricky because as a city organization, you're not supposed to ever recommend a company or a person, so it gets a little tricky. That might be something that maybe partnership with PRC, Brian.
Maybe, particularly for as access to apprenticeships, et cetera. But I really like the comparison to the DBE, Chris.
Yeah.
Because I think that although it's different, that kind of that level of integrity, if you will, or I don't know. I'm making notes about how we might pursue that.
Well, a follow-up question from one of our attendees here says, I think she touched on also the qualified list of contractors, especially if you have a training program, but it sounds like your training program was that apprenticeship, fostering an apprenticeship. I wonder, and I speak for the interest of the architects who are in the city working in the VCC. We want to avoid violations. We don't want to see our subcontractors do something just because they thought it was best, and then we get the call that we have to come in for a violations hearing. That's a waste of our time also. We would like to have qualified people as well. And if it's not maybe a list of individual companies that have been approved, maybe like the DBE, it just says find somebody with a certification, and that certification would be provided through, like, I don't know, Delgado, who has these other programs that are VOTEC training programs for maritime industry. Maybe they could expand to these offerings as well, as they have a construction department that looks at school building and training high schoolers. Just as an example, they have a construction arm that's trying to train that next generation of professionals.
And we really are, it is an art form that is being lost. And particularly with, in the day and age of prefab materials and it doesn't lend itself to the level of craftsmanship that these buildings really need.
Good insights there. Thank you so much. We are just about at the end of our time right now, but you have both been a tremendous wealth of information for this, and I'm excited to see what the next opportunities will be as your OBES becomes more established and starts to make its presence more consistent and known, how we can re-engage the architectural community through AIA to help it be its best form of protecting the city while being an economic engine.
And it's an invaluable relationship with us as well. So I'm very excited about this opportunity for us to get together and have these conversations.
Likewise. I learn something new every time we get together. It's fun.
Well, thank you all so much for participating. We really, really appreciate you and your time. And Brian and Renee, can our attendees reach out to you with any further questions?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
My email address is bdblock@nola.gov, bdblock@nola.gov. So please reach out. I'm neurotic about responding. I will always respond to your messages.
My email is much longer than that, but you can find it on the VCC website. All of our emails and contact information. It is best to reach us by email right now.
Great, that is great to know. All right, any parting comments before we wrap things up here?
Not from me.
All right, well, thank you all so much again then. Right before we close up, I just want to remind our attendees that today is the last day of the AIA holiday toy drive, and you can find more information about that on our website. And then we have one more CEU webinar presentation next week on Tuesday, on December 15th, and you can find info about that on our website and register there as well. Alrighty, everybody, thank you so much to our panelists and our moderator. Thank you everyone for attending, and we hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Take care. Thanks.